Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. In this installment of the A to Z of PlayStation Hidden Gems, we are looking at 10 games beginning with the letter H. But will these games make us happy? Are they humorous? Or will they just give us hemorrhoids? There's only one way to find out. Now how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. We are going to start on the battleground with Hogs of War, a turn-based strategy game where you take control of a regiment of porky soldiers as you set off across the world taking part in battles with other bacon battlers. In a nutshell, this is a 3D version of the Worms games, but you play as pigs instead of worms, and thankfully they've done a good job of stealing the premise and making it 3D and fun. You can choose from a few different races of pigs. They're all the same in terms of how they play and the weapons they get. It just really comes down to the colour you prefer or which racist voiceover you want to hear. But it's okay, this was the early 2000s. In single player, you're dropped into a range of 3D environments and your mission is to just basically kill all the other pigs. Each map has a mini-map where you can see any enemies, weapons or health pickups, and on your turn you have a limited number of time to explore the map, get yourself into a tactical position, and of course shoot the crackling out of your enemies. The controls are fine. It's tank controls, so you can run and jump and you have to rotate your character. This is fine, and the fact that it's turn-based means that it never causes any issues. Each weapon has its own way of working. For instance, most bullet weapons can be aimed in a first-person view but have limited range. Bazookas and grenades need to be charged to be shot or thrown further, and so on. It works well and using each weapon is easy, though the ranged weapons will take a bit of practice to get used to. As you progress through the single player, you can promote your pigs. This unlocks new weapons and abilities for them, as well as increasing their hit points. I really like this mechanic, and you can choose what path your pigs take, so they can be heavy weapons experts, espionage, medics or engineers. Of course, each of these has their own weapons and perks to go along with it, so it's worth having a few of each on your team. The graphics here are decent, the battlefields get quite large, and there's little to no pop-in, which is handy as you can see your enemies in the distance. The pigs themselves look fine and the animation is kind of funny, with pigs getting injured the less health they have, which also makes them move slower. This of course causes problems against the timer, so be sure to have your medic close by. Where the game really shines though is against a friend in multiplayer. It's just so much fun going to war with your mate to see who is the prime cut. This is really a fun game, and it's definitely one that I think everyone should have in their collection, especially if you like playing games with your mates. Next up in the fighting spot that I seem to have put for all these videos is Heaven's Gate from Atlas. This is a one-on-one 3D fighter where those bloody rascals down in hell have given some evil people demon powers. But don't worry, that god thing has given some people heaven's powers to go fight them and stop them from being cheeky monkeys. Literally in the one character's case. You get 8 characters to choose from, with some unlockable ones hidden away too. Of course, each character has their own special moves and stats. I did find that the special moves here are actually quite hard to pull off though, but I was occasionally able to do it. The characters are all pretty decent looking and the graphics here are actually really good, with some great animation too. It is a little boxy, but certainly not a bad looking game. Control wise, this is actually pretty good, aside from the difficult to pull off special moves. The regular attacks etc. all work well and it's responsive and quite fast. You can also press all 4 face buttons when you've powered up, and this makes you a little faster and stronger. And you can do a super move while you're in this mode, but I'll be honest, I never managed to pull one off. Also, the majority of the movesets are punches and kicks. There aren't really any crazy fireballs or anything like that in here. For the most part, you'll be pressing a direction and attack button at the same time in order to do different moves. As it's a 3D fighter, you can wander around the arena, though you never really need to, and I didn't bother. It was only useful really to roll away from enemies once you've been knocked down, otherwise you tend to end up getting sat on or with a knee in the face. You do have a few game modes here too, with training, arcade and even a tough guy mode where you get just 1 energy bar for the whole thing. Something that is a little disappointing is that there's no character endings here, so when you win it just sort of ends. This makes the whole story aspect totally redundant, and even if it was just a wall of text, something would have been nice. But that shouldn't put you off playing if you like fighting games, as the actual combat is pretty good, and like I said, it looks great. This would be another game that is good if you have a few mates around that like a ruck, so you can pass the controllers between yourselves for an evening. Hard Edge from Sunsoft is an action-adventure game where you play as characters who are infiltrating a tower block and have to save it from terrorists. The game plays a lot like Resident Evil, only with a bigger emphasis on the action and terrorists instead of zombies. Throughout the game you'll be switching between 4 characters, and the game actually switches automatically to show what each one is up to as the story progresses. This is a really nice touch. There are times when there's multiple characters present with only one on screen at the time, and you just have to sort of pretend the other one is there with you. They just show up in cutscenes. Everything here plays quite well actually, as you'd expect. It's tank controls and you can run as well as interact with just about everything in every room. If it's not an item collect, then you're generally given some text about what you're interacting with. This can be a bit annoying as there's no way to speed up or skip the text, so you'll be reading the same thing over and over, and it can take ages for the text to disappear. But there's no way around this, as you need to explore every nook and cranny to find items and keys to progress. The combat here is handled well. Each character gets their own weapons. For example, Michelle starts with a laser knife and you have to just hit the square button to do a combo. It's not very powerful, but it doesn't use ammo and doesn't need to reload. Alex has a pistol that is powerful and has range, but of course it uses ammo and does need to reload, which can leave you in a bind. You'll find other weapons as you progress too. Enemies come in a few varieties like robots, humans and even mutants, and they're all fun to fight, though of course you have to be careful as the tank controls can make aiming a little bit tricky. Graphically the game looks really good with some nice pre-rendered backgrounds and the character models are all great. There's a load of cutscenes which all look very good, though of course the voice acting is pretty damn terrible, just as we like it on the PS1. It's a slow-paced game though, and you'll be backtracking a lot to find new items, keys and things like that to get into new areas you couldn't access before. And though you do get a pretty decent map, this is the kind of game where it's handy to keep notes of rooms and areas you need to go back to. As I'm stupid, I often found an item but then couldn't remember where the hell I needed to go to use it, though smart people like you will likely have less issues with this. I really did enjoy the music here, and it does a great job of matching with the action. It's different if there are enemies around, and it might just be me, but I'm sure it was more mysterious in places of interest that had interactive items or clues. Again, I might be making this up, but if it is right, then that's a great way to give a hint or something that needs to be done, and game developers should use the music more for that sort of thing. I really enjoyed playing this one, and though I haven't finished it yet, I will probably go back to do so, as the story is interesting, the gameplay is fun, if a little stiff, and the graphics are great. Check this one out if you can. If you prefer 2D cute-em-ups to gritty 3D action games, then you might want to check out Harmful Park from Skythink Systems, as that's exactly what it is. In this 1 or 2 player shooter, you play as a couple of sisters who visit a brand new theme park that's gone mad and all the attractions are now out to kill you, but it's alright as it looks cute. So you jump on your flying thing armed with some food-based weapons and you go shoot the stuffing out of all the toys and save the theme park. The graphics here are great, everything is super bright and colourful and there's always loads going on all over the place. Characters are small, and though it probably could be done on a 16-bit console, it all runs super smooth here on the PlayStation, and I only encountered slowdown a handful of times. Your flying thing is armed with 4 weapons at a time, and you can switch between them whenever you like. You've got your potato, which is your standard shot, there's an ice cream beam, which is really powerful, and there's a bunch of jelly beans that home in on enemies, as well as super pies that are really powerful but slow to fire. Each of these can be upgraded 4 times, and each upgrade makes the weapon fire more shots and do more damage. However, if you die, you lose all the power from the weapon that you're using. Thankfully, you do keep the ones that you weren't using, so you tend to have a backup. This does make choosing your power-ups quite tactical though, as you'll likely have weapons you prefer. However, it's a good idea to have each one at least level 2 or higher, as a lot of enemies take a few hits, and you can only take 1 before you bite the dust. Each weapon also has its own clear all attack. These are super powerful and surprisingly kill even most bosses in just 1 or 2 hits, though you do only get a handful of them to use throughout the game and the pickups aren't all that common. The game does have a great sense of humour here and everything is very Japanese, but I like that. Each level did keep me wanting to play to see what happens next, and the solid controls and decent soundtrack didn't hurt either. It's not a massively long game, and you actually get unlimited credits, so you'll breeze through the game on your first try, but it's a lot of fun to do so, and well worth checking out if you can find it somewhere. Time for some Japanese weirdness now with Hakaio, King of Crusher, and yes, I'm aware I've probably said that completely wrong. In this bizarre game, you play as a bloke who is bitten by an evil bug thing who then tells you to stop holding back your emotions and to smash shit up. So that's exactly what you do. You start smashing up your house while your wife grabs your newborn baby and runs for her life. Sensible. You have 3 attack buttons and a jump button. You can punch, kick and headbutt, and your aim is to literally smash everything you can in all the levels. There's a red bar at the bottom of the screen that once it's full, you can then exit onto the next level. You also have a yellow bar, which is basically your health and a timer all in one. It's constantly draining, but smashing stuff restores a portion of it, so it really is in your interest to just keep destroying everything you see. There are enemies in the levels too. You can't actually hurt them, or at least I couldn't, so you just need to ignore them and attempt to dodge their attacks while destroying whatever you can find. Each of the attacks is slightly different in terms of power and range, but you'll soon figure out that the kick is basically the only one you need. In terms of levels, you visit houses, your office, the streets and other urban areas, and they have what you'd expect in them for you to smash up. You can always tell if something is breakable as it shakes when you hit it, so if you do kick something and it doesn't shake, just ignore it and move on. You also have a mini-map that shows where enemies are and gives a rough idea of where the exit is, which is nice. What's more awesome here is that every few levels you mutate, turning into a bigger and bigger monster, until you're basically a Godzilla-sized monster destroying cities and taking on the army. It's really feckin' cool. Graphically, the game isn't particularly great, as you can see, and to be honest, the controls aren't even that good either, with terrible turning and poor hit detection. Also, the camera just kinda sucks, and it's always way too close to your character, so you can barely see what's going on around you. However, it's just so much fun to play with crazy cutscenes that thankfully someone has translated, and going around smashing stuff up is great fun from start to finish. The game is short and pretty easy, just like Joe's first girlfriend, and it can actually be beaten in about 2 hours, but I highly recommend finding a way to play this, getting some friends on the couch and playing through the game in just one sitting. You'll be laughing all the way through when you aren't screaming at the controls. Herc's Adventure from LucasArts is a little more grounded, but still a wacky fun game. Here you play as either Hercules, Atlanta or Jason in a game set in ancient Greece, and that bloody god of the underworld Hades is causing havoc again. So Zeus sends you down to go sort him out. You already know this, but each of the characters has their own strengths and weaknesses. Herc is of course very strong and attacks with a club. Atlanta is faster but weaker, however she does have a ranged attack. And I'll be honest, I didn't try Jason, but I'm sure he's great. Anyway, it's a top-down action game that for the most part is basically a large open world and kind of plays like the old Zelda games. You have to explore the large open world, getting new abilities and items, tracking down the other gods who will help you out and get you further into the game. It's great. The game looks fantastic with awesome 2D sprites that are packed with animation and character. There's loads of animated cutscenes here, a lot of which play out in-game, and it works really well. As it's LucasArts, every character is full of personality, and the writing is often pretty funny too. It's a game that actually makes me want to watch the cutscenes, if you can believe that. The map is split into different areas, so you'll be exploring cities, forests, deserts and even the sea. Each area has its own enemies and bosses for you to fight, and there's also loads of hidden areas containing sub-weapons, health and other items. The controls here are decent and responsive. You can jump and sprint. Sprinting uses stamina though. Depending on the character, you can also lift most enemies as well as rocks and other large items. Lifting and carrying things also drains your stamina, so don't go crazy. Though this doesn't actually affect too much, it just means you can't lift things up or run. Thankfully, attacking doesn't use stamina, as that would be annoying, and you just have to wait a few seconds for it to recharge. You get a map that gives a rough idea of where you need to go, but the game really does want you to explore a lot. I often found that I was lost for quite a while, and as with most games like this, you'll be doing a lot of backtracking, but later on in the game you do find ways to get around quicker, which is always welcome. You can even play this game in 2-player co-op, which I imagine would be really good fun, except we all know that Belt Buckle will be rubbish at it. This is a great game that was likely overlooked as it was 2D and no one wanted that in the PS1 era, but it is well worth owning, though looking at the price, you're probably better off emulating it. Horned Owl is a light gun shooter made by the same people that brought us the awesome Elemental Gearbolt, so make sure you check out the Letter E video for more on that game. This is very similar in terms of style. It's a light gun shooter where you have to worry about moving your cursor around, which you can do with either a controller or the PS1 mouse, or if you have the PlayStation 1 light gun, you can just use that. You're part of a law enforcement team who need to stop evil people from being evil, which involves shooting a lot of bad guys. The graphics here are awesome. You've got 3D environments, but all the enemies are 2D sprites that look fantastic and have some great animation and scaling. My only complaint is that it takes a while for new enemies to be introduced, and even when they are introduced, you still spend most of your time seeing the same enemies over and over. The controls are of course simple, you just move the cursor. Then you've got a shoot button or a special clear all button and a reload button, and that's it. You can also charge your main shot to fire loads of bullets at once, but I didn't really find that this was that useful to be honest, so I rarely used it. In between levels you get some really good animated cutscenes that are all in Japanese, as this never came out anywhere else, which is a shame. The levels themselves are all in urban areas, so do fall into that everything becoming grey and brown problem. They each last about 10 minutes too, though they aren't easy by any means. Enemies will fire guns and rockets at you, some of the projectiles can be shot down, which is good. Also, you're given an indicator telling you which enemy is about to attack you, so you know where you should be aiming first. And really, that's all there is to the game. It's an on-rails light gun shooter after all, but it looks great and plays great no matter what method you're using. If you're a fan of this sort of thing, then you definitely want to give it a go. Time for the first sports game in this series of videos now, but don't worry, it's a good one. It's Hot Shots Golf 2. Now for some reason, golf games are probably my second favourite sports games to play after football. That's soccer to you thick boys. And this one here is a damn fun one to play. It's golf, so it doesn't really need much of the way of explaining. You have a hole, so use your bats to get the ball in it. What makes this fun to play is the easy pick up and play controls and variety of holes to play on. It's a super simple game, you just choose your direction, angle and power of your shot, then press X to fill a bar. Press it at the top of the bar for power, and then when it comes back down you want to get it as close to the line as you can, as this is how accurately you'll hit the ball. And really that's all there is to the gameplay. You do also have some power shots if you need more distance, but you can't use them that often. And there's also putting when you're close to the hole. It all works well, and while you can easily get going in just a few minutes, it definitely takes practice to get used to how much power you need and the angles you want to go for. The game does let you control the camera, so you can take a look around the course to get a feel for the best route to take. And then when you're putting, you get a grid that shows you the contours of the ground to help with accuracy. The graphics here are fine, the courses themselves are 3D and look decent enough, all the characters are pre-rendered and they look good, but they don't have too much animation. There are a load of them though. You start with just 3, but there's like 10 or so to unlock, as well as a whole load of new holes to play through that get more and more wacky. The characters each have their own stats, and choosing the right person for your playstyle is important, as some favour power over accuracy and vice versa. Getting a par on courses isn't easy though, and I did manage it a fair few times, but it didn't take long for the courses to get more difficult and I'd struggle even to get a par 4 or 5, but I did want to keep playing, even though I considered rage quitting quite a few times when I did some shit putting, but that was never down to the game itself, it was me being impatient and not checking I was making the best shot. This game is a whole lot of fun. It's a great combination of being simple enough for new players to be able to enjoy and having enough depth for those that want to put the time in. It plays a hell of a lot like the Mario Golf games, and I really wouldn't be surprised if some of the developers were involved in both games. If you like golf or games to play with mates, this is definitely one to check out. Even if you don't like golf, I would say give this a try for a few holes. You might just be surprised. Hybrid from Movie Time is a first-person shooter that sees you in a mission to save Earth after an alien invasion. You can choose to play as one of 4 characters, and they each have access to different weapons and special abilities that you'll need to take on the aliens' robot army, as well as a number of human and mutant monsters that want you dead. You'll be exploring a load of quite large, complex levels where you need to find keys to make it to the exit. As with most FPS games of the era, the levels are often quite cryptic as to where you need to go. There's hidden areas and monsters all over the place, and some levels can take a while to get through. The graphics here aren't great. In fact, the game really has a budget feel to it. The controls are stiff, the shooting is kind of slow, and everything is a bit dark, and there's a lot of pop-in. I'll be honest, this isn't really a great game at all, but I really did have some fun playing it and found it kinda hard to put down, though that could be because I love FPS games. The character portraits you get here are really ugly and look like the kind of designs a 15-year-old would come up with, though that doesn't really matter as you don't see them during the game. One good thing about the simple graphics though is that there's rarely any slowdown, which is nice, but it can happen if there's a ton of enemies on screen. And speaking of enemies, it's often hard to avoid their attacks. This is due to regular narrow corridors and tight spaces where you don't have space to strafe. And even when you do though, you can usually still take hits and seem to have a massive hitbox. It doesn't help that the controls are sluggish, so strafing takes a second or two for you to get out of the way, and by then you've been shot in the face. But it really does have its positives. The different characters help to mix things up. Even if they do have basically all the same levels, they are actually quite different to play as. Some of them can use magic and they all have different movement speeds, and the weapons are actually different for each character too. So with one character your gun might shoot slowly but does more damage, whereas others, the same weapon is less powerful but has a faster rate of fire. The story doesn't change depending on who you play as, so this is just a case of using all the characters and seeing which one you prefer. If you can handle a bit of jank and getting stuck on scenery, as well as some very strange voice work and design choices, then this is worth giving it a try. It's not great, but it's definitely not the worst game out there by a long stretch. It's also one of those rare games out there that's actually affordable if you wanted to buy a physical copy too. And finally for today, here is The Hive. This is a first-person FMV game where you're a space pilot soldier bloke who has to try and stop evil humans and aliens from letting an evil hive of bug-like monsters from being unleashed into the galaxy. As it's an FMV game, the level of interactivity is pretty limited, so it's all about the cool cutscenes and action. The game basically starts off like Star Wars, and you're shooting down enemy ships that are coming at you from all angles. Of course, as the whole thing is on rails, all you need to worry about is moving your cursor and hammering the buttons to shoot. You'll see the enemy ships as well as targets appear on other things that you can shoot as well. Essentially, as it's all FMV, you just need to wait out the movie without being destroyed. You have a health bar at the bottom of the screen, and thankfully this constantly refills, making these levels actually manageable. The gameplay mixes up quite a lot as you play as well. You'll soon crash land on a frozen planet where you'll need to make an emergency maneuver with your limited fuel in your ship while still being attacked. This part of the game is really tough, and it's all about knowing when the predetermined crash locations are and making sure you press the correct button at the correct time. You'll eventually end up in an enemy base full of enemies, and you can now look up and down, and in some places turn around 360 degrees. Again, you only need to worry about moving your cursor and your health will continue to regenerate, which makes the game very beatable, but still not entirely easy, especially on some later levels. Graphically, the game has a certain charm to it. I actually really like the look of these old FMV games. They look like really early 90s CGI from bad films, and I'm well aware that it is a bit crap, but it's good crap. Aiming is easy with the D-pad, though it is quite slow and can take a while to get across the screen, and this was before analog, so it's not that precise, but it does have a generous lock-on which can help. But you do have to take into account the fact that your bullets do take a while to get where they're going, so it's not always an instant hit. Dying can actually be quite hard to do here though, especially on the easier difficulty, as you do have regenerating health. Though when you do die, you're always set back to the start of the level, which can be really annoying. There's times within the level that you might get a surprise attack and you just have a second or two to react, kind of like a quick time event. These are fine once you've played the level a few times, but if you don't know that it's there, then you're likely to lose them the first time every time. Thankfully, you do get unlimited continues, which does mean you can get through this game pretty quickly. The story is of course the main focus here, and let's face it, it's a generic B-movie plot at best, though the hammy voice acting and dodgy cutscenes do add to the appeal for me, as I'm a fan of crappy movies. If you like FMV games and Star Wars rip-offs, then maybe give this one a go. It's actually another game that's relatively cheap to buy as well, and will probably entertain you for the hour or two that it takes to get through the story. So there you go, 10 hidden gems for the PS1 starting with the letter H. What are some of your favourites? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out the rest of the videos in this series if you haven't already. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We've got loads of great content for everyone to enjoy. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.